The Supreme Court will hear two cases that may determine the legality of President Trump's signature second-term tariff policy. The court's decision will determine if the president can unilaterally set tariffs without the approval of Congress. The High Court took two cases on tariffs yesterday, one of which was filed by the administration after an appeals court ruled last month that Trump's tariff policy did exceed his presidential powers. The Constitution specifically states that the ability to set tariffs is assigned to Congress. To bypass that requirement, the president used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a law that grants the president the right to regulate imports during national emergencies. The appeals court found that law does not grant the president the right to impose global tariffs without any end date. Joining us now, NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Danny, if you could put on your Supreme Court justice hat or wig right now, do you think that the justices, or what do you think that they're going to ask at next month's oral arguments on this tariff case?
Oh, they're going to have a lot of interesting questions about the government's view of the scope of the president's powers under IEEPA. That's that federal law that you just talked about. IEEPA appears to grant broad power to the president to regulate these issues during an emergency. So the justices are going to want to know, what do you consider an emergency? What do you consider the extent of the president's powers under this law? And what do you say to the fact that no other president has interpreted this law so broadly and in a way that they could simply regulate all tariffs? They're going to ask for the support that exists in the text of that law. So I think we're going to see a lot of questions about how the administration views their powers under IEEPA.
But it comes as the court has seemed to be fairly amenable to President Trump's cases in the past. But some legal experts are now saying that they might rule against him in this case. What's your prediction here?
Yeah, they likely will rule against him, although they're not required to follow the lower court's decisions on these issues of law, these pure issues of law and arguably constitutional law. Trump has lost pretty much entirely in the lower courts, whether it be at the Court of International Trade, whether it be at the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. So that is not necessarily, it's not binding at all in the Supreme Court, but it is a bit of a forecast how the court may rule. And I think it does present an issue of separation of powers and interpretation of this law that appears on its face to grant broad powers to the president, maybe overbroad powers to the president. But on the other hand, this is a court full of conservatives that will tend to look at the text of the statute. And if the statute allows the power, then the statute allows the power.
Then the statute allows the power. Danny, I want to get your input on another topic, but it sort of fits in the vein of, isn't this Congress's job? Maybe. I want to give you an update on a story that we reported yesterday, where the Supreme Court will allow President Trump to hold back $4 billion in foreign aid spending previously appropriated by Congress while the court considers the case. The order issued by Chief Justice John Roberts yesterday is not a final court decision, but it's going to grant the administration's emergency request to block a lower court ruling, which would have forced the White House to spend the money unless Congress approved the freeze. The underlying lawsuit was brought by various groups that receive foreign aid funding, led by the Global Health Council. Chief Justice Roberts asked those groups to file a response to the government by the end of the week. The president had previously informed Congress he didn't plan on releasing these funds. The Constitution, though, explicitly gives Congress the power to allocate federal money. So, Danny, what happened to power of the purse being Congress's? I mean, how is the Supreme Court going to parse through this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting question on how to divide the issue of if Congress directs the executive branch or the president to spend the money, does he have to spend the money, or can they also tell him how to spend the money? In other words, there's a difference between thou shalt spend the money and where exactly the money goes. It's a very interesting thing. It may end up being a decision that the administration, Trump, has to spend the money, but the courts will not and cannot tell him how exactly to spend it, where to spend it, who to pay. And it's important also to consider that so many of these, and you pointed this out, so many of these decisions, even at the Supreme Court now, are stays. They're holds on lower court decisions or injunctions until the courts can figure out the issue on the merits. So many of these are going on because the Trump administration fires these things out by executive order, and things have to move very quickly. So a lot of these decisions we're dealing with are injunctions or stays upon stays upon stays, and it stays all the way down.
We're going to have you keep us posted on all of it. NBC News and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, thank you.